Hi, I'm Elizabeth Sullivan, a dancer wellness coach for pre-professional ballet students. Most of the students that I work with are training to maybe have a career in professional ballet one day. I also trained at a pre-professional level for many years and then went on to have a career with the Cleveland Ballet and the Boston Ballet companies. Now I work as a coach and I work to help dancers find their highest state of mental and emotional and physical wellness through sharing some tools and strategies with them that I have studied and researched. So today's topic is motivation and focus. These are two important areas for all dancers who are training, and indeed professional dancers as well. And these two topics today are particularly important for your summer experience, given that you're going to be having this experience training in your home in isolation due to the lockdowns because of COVID-19. So, even if it's normal to have some experiences of finding yourself a little unmotivated and a little unfocused when you're in the dance studio, now that you're training at home, you may find that it's even more challenging to stay motivated. And in fact, in my private coaching practice, this is what I've heard since the lockdowns began in mid March, which is why I've chosen this topic. Most of the dancers I've worked with have gone through some period of time since mid March when they've had difficulty coming to the bar, getting onto the Zoom session, and really staying focused and interested in pursuing their training in this new medium. But of course, if you still have this dream and this desire to dance in your future, even your near future, this is the option that's open to you right now. So I want to make sure that you have the tools that you need to stay engaged and stay focused and feel still really motivated about what you're doing with your training. So first, we're going to start with some barriers to motivation and focus that may come up for you even in the studio. The time that people spend comparing themselves to their peers is often a point of distraction. It takes them away from their focus on their own work and their own tasks. It also can be motivating, but it can also be demotivating if you end up comparing yourself down to your peers. So that can be a challenge. And it may not be a challenge so much now that you're training from home because you're not standing right next to these people and you're not able to observe them with the same intensity. But it may be, it depends on your situation. Sometimes in the studio, dancers also find that their motivation will wane a bit if they're not getting a lot of personal attention from their teacher. So, they may feel less focused and less motivated without those corrections. So we'll be talking today about ways to get around that particular need that you may have. Another typical barrier to focus is, or probably the number one barrier, is a distracted mind, right? A wandering mind. You may have heard the phrase monkey mind. And this phrase is used to describe what is a very natural trait in all human beings, which is that it's hard for us to focus on one thing for any length of time. It's very natural for our minds to go for a bit of a wander. And so sometimes our focus is pulled away from the task that we are trying to focus on by this distracted monkey mind. This could still be true in the lockdown, of course, and you may find that your distractions are even more intense and more out of your control. For example, you are in a space right now that is not a ballet specific space. Even if you've carved out a little angle of your bedroom or your dining room or your basement, it's not a dance studio. Your teacher is not in front of you, your peers are not around you. So there's all sorts of distractions there. Some other distractions that might be coming up for some of you are more serious in nature. You may find that you are thinking a lot about the pandemic. You may find that your mind is going to some of the social injustice movements that are going around the country and indeed the world right now. And these are serious things to contemplate, right? But if they're coming onto your radar while you're trying to do your dance training, it's not really going to take you any closer to your goals, and it's going to end up being a frustrating experience. So we're going to be talking about how to deal with some of those distractions. I'm going to share my screen with you now just so that you have something to look at. You can see my notes while we're talking together. Here we are. We'll go into the slideshow. Okay. So we're going to start with motivation. I've chosen to put these two topics together today because when someone is motivated, it makes it much easier to focus. And these little bubbles here, you can almost think of as that kind of fizzy excitement feeling that you have when you're feeling really motivated to dance. And then you get to the studio and you are able to focus so much easier, right? Because you're motivated. So we're putting these two things together today for a specific reason, and that is that the one really influences the other, especially if your motivation is intrinsic. Intrinsic motivation is just internal motivation, meaning that your motivation comes from the inside rather than the outside. This is the kind of motivation that you want to have because it means that you're in control of whether or not you're motivated at any given time on any given day. For those of you who feel that you're more extrinsically motivated or externally motivated, this is going to be perhaps a more challenging time for you. If you're motivated by things like teacher feedback, um, peer compliments, or peer attention, um, motivated by having live music, especially when it comes to teacher feedback. Although you want teacher feedback, right, and it's important for your development and your progress as a dancer, ultimately you want to be building your motivation to get to the studio every day or to get to your bar every day from the inside out, right? You want your motivation to be self motivated and to be about your process and what you're looking forward to rather than dependent on a teacher who you can't control or students feedback who now you no longer have that because you're not in a studio. So right away, right out of the gate here, I'm going to share with you some tools to build your intrinsic motivation. The first one is to start your summer by creating a summer vision. Hopefully you have something to do this summer. You're in a summer intensive program. Maybe you're at your home studio. Maybe you're working virtually with a program that you were going to go to. But the idea is to start with kind of an umbrella vision of what it is that you want to accomplish. Where do you want to be at the end of the summer? What goals do you want to have accomplished? And how do you want to feel about your summer experience? Then you're going to start to write some goals. I do suggest for all of these exercises that you write them down, get a journal, get a notebook, and keep track of these things in writing because it is quite powerful to write things down. If you want, you can do it on a computer or even on your phone, but something that you can refer to later on in a visual way can be really helpful. So the two types of goals I'm going to ask you to set are outcome and process, which are exactly what they sound like. So the outcome goals are what are the goals that you want to have happen by the end of the summer? And then the process goals are the smaller goals that lead up to accomplishing your outcome. So, for example, if an outcome goal of yours is to improve your pirouettes this summer, then you're going to have to look at what are the processes that you want to engage in to get better pirouettes. Let's assume that your teacher has told you that you need to be up on a higher releve for your pirouettes in flat shoes. So you might want to set as a process goal, building up some strength in your ankles and calves, as well as in your upper thigh and glute rotation so that you can really hold yourself up really high on that releve, which will facilitate more turns, right? That would be a process goal. You could even break that down further into how many releves do you want to do every day to build up some of that strength? Do you want to do some turnout exercises for your hips to build that turnout in your upper leg, right? Another process goal for improving your pirouettes might be to raise and hold your passe in a turned out position for all of your pirouettes. So you might want to set some goals around that, right? Maybe you need to do a bit more stretching to get your passe more to the side. Maybe you need to do some hamstring strengthening to be able to hold that leg right up so that it's parallel to the floor. So the process goals are building up to the outcome. And then the outcome goal is in service of your summer vision. So if you build this properly, your vision is kind of at the top, like an umbrella, and underneath you have your outcome goals and then your process goals. When you're setting goals, they should be SMART goals. And you may be familiar with this acronym, so I'm going to go through it anyway for those of you that haven't heard it before. Your goals should always be specific. If you have a vague goal, then it is very hard to measure whether or not you have achieved the goal. So you want your goal to be specific, you want it to be measurable, you want it to be action based, which means you don't just want to think about how to achieve this goal. You want to actually be able to take action in order to achieve the goal. You want the goal to be reachable. Some dancers are surprised by this because, as perfectionists always striving for the unattainable goal of perfection in ballet, some dancers say to me, well, I don't want to set goals that I can reach because then I'm not going to work very hard. But I assure you, if you set the right kinds of goals, if they're specific and measurable and you're taking action, you want to be able to reach them. And they still can be very challenging. But the idea is that when you reach a goal, it builds in you a sense of confidence, a sense of self efficacy, that you are capable of achieving a goal. And that builds a very strong positive feedback loop for you. When you do that, then you see your own progress, you track your own progress, and it builds a kind of excitement around setting goals in the future. And the T stands for time sensitive. You always want to set your specific goals within a certain time frame. And this is just so that you can hold yourself accountable. In this case, the summer intensive time period is a really neat kind of succinct timeline that you can set your goals up in. And you may even want to say, some goals could be weekly, some goals could be daily, and then you could have overall goals that will fit under that umbrella of summer intensive. But you always want to have a timeline for how long you're going to work on something. So just going back, you've got your summer vision, you've got your goals. And then the third thing I'm going to ask you to do is to set up in your calendar, in your schedule, a weekly goal review. This is where you set aside 10 minutes, one day a week, to look back at the goals you have set and assess your progress. So most of my dancers like to do this at the kind of very beginning of the week. So maybe Sunday night or even Monday morning. They take out their notebook, they assess how the goals from the past week went, and then they set goals for the week coming up. So you do not have to sit down today or tomorrow and create all of your outcome and process goals. You might want to just create a few outcome goals and a few process goals. And then as you go through your summer program, you can update those. So as you meet your process goals, then you can move those off the list, right? And you can update and upgrade your process goals for the following week. This review is more important than most people think it is. The number one problem with a goal setting exercise is that everybody gets really excited about writing it down and making bullets. And, it's so much fun to think about what you want to accomplish. And then they close up the notebook and they put it away and they never look at it again, which is basically a waste of time, right? Why bother? Because it doesn't actually give you the outcome that you want if you don't revisit those goals with some regularity. So what I recommend is that you set up this weekly goal review in your calendar or on your schedule, however you're organized, and just make sure you check in with it once a week, because that way you can see your own progress, track your own progress, and that creates this marvelous feedback loop. So we're going right back up to motivation, which is where we started, right? If you are intrinsically motivated, and you go ahead and you set these goals and you're checking in with them regularly, the goal setting will motivate you because you will know what you're working on. So you're not waiting for corrections from your teacher. You're not waiting for the right kind of choreography or the right kind of piece or opportunity to get you motivated. You already have a set of goals that you're being motivated by. When you are motivated, then it makes it so much easier to focus, because you know what you're focusing on, right? It's much easier than just going in and hoping that someone's going to give you something to focus on. And in turn, when you're very focused, it's much more likely that you're going to achieve your goals because motivation and focus together really help produce, a higher level of achievement. Then when you achieve those goals, it enhances the focus and motivation. So as you can see, this is a nice little loop. And then once you've accomplished a goal and you're feeling really motivated and focused, it makes it so much more fun to go back and set goals for the next week. So this is where I think you can see that connection again between motivation and focus. And then you can see how the goal setting, which is a very sort of practical bread and butter kind of exercise, can tie you into this beautiful positive feedback loop. Now, this is really helpful all the time when you're in a studio, when you're in a professional company, when you're dancing in a normal time, right? No pandemic, right? This is really, really helpful. And my dancers that I've been coaching for years use this through their training years, and they continue to use it in their professional years when sometimes the corrections and the amount of personal feedback really decrease when you become a new professional, a young professional. But it is especially important now when you're training this summer in your home, in your little home studio, whatever you've created there. It's really important to create some positive feedback for yourself because at least what I've heard so far from dancers in the spring, you're lacking a lot of that kind of that fizzy energy that you get from being in a studio, right? From having watching your peers work really hard. They work hard, you push yourself harder. When you push, they see you and then they push, right? There's all that great kind of healthy competition that you get in the studio that creates this motivation and creates more of a sense of what you want to focus on. And you don't have that now because I've done a few Zoom calls and I've got a little grid in front of me of all these little screens, and I can just imagine that if I was taking a class, I mean, you can barely see anyone from your screen, and you probably only want to look at yourself so that you can at least have a kind of mirror for those of you that don't have a mirror at home. So that natural kind of energy that you normally get in the classroom is missing. Also, the teacher feedback is different. Now, I know that some teachers are giving a lot of very personalized feedback in the Zoom virtual sessions. People have set up all kinds of creative ways to be able to give their dancers feedback, which is amazing. But some of you aren't getting that. And especially maybe in your summer course, you may be in a larger class than you were this spring, and you may feel that you're sort of missing out on that kind of personal attention. I'm not trying to downplay that. It's extremely important to have feedback from your teacher, absolutely. But you're not in a situation where you can elicit that the way that you might if you were in a studio, right? So again, I think that this positive feedback loop is really important and is something that you have control over and you can create for yourself so that you can have a very productive and positive summer. So I encourage you to think about your motivation and to try to build up your intrinsic skills in that area if you feel like maybe you need that. So let's switch for just a second and talk more specifically about focus. What is focus? Well, as a verb, it means to pay particular attention to something, right? And as a noun, you can say that something is the focus. It means that it's the center of interest or activity. So I think that I just want to draw your attention to, a standard dictionary definition of this to notice that there's nothing here that is judgmental, right? It doesn't say anything about when you pay particular attention to something, it means you're smarter or you're better or you have more potential, right? There's nothing here that says that when you lose focus, it means, you're a real mess, right? There's nothing emotional here. There's nothing around judgment. And that's important because most dancers seem to think that when they're unable to focus, that it's some kind of indication of their inability to continue their dancing studies or some kind of indication of some kind of negativity about them as a person. And it's really not. And focus is a skill, right? It's not an attribute. It's not something that you just have or you don't have. And in this case, if you look at it as a verb, to focus is an action, right? And so that's important too, because this is something that you can improve upon. If your focusing skills are not great right now, if you're feeling highly distracted, you're first of all, you're not alone. But secondly, don't worry about it. Try to build the skill, right? Try to use some of the tools I'm going to give you today to build this up. And just like anything else that you do in dance, if you pay attention to your focus as a skill, and if you take it on as a challenge, you will be able to improve it. And that's a really fantastic thing. Oh, yes. So if you're going to lose focus, it just means that you're not paying particular attention to something, right? And some causes of lost or diluted focus, I touched upon some of those at the beginning of my talk, but it could be distraction. The monkey mind could be inaction, right? And sort of causing you to lose your sense of focus on your task, whatever that task may be. The distractions can be external to you, they can be internal in your own mind. There are all kinds of reasons why we lose our sense of focus at any given moment. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is that there is not, well, a lot of dancers think that it's kind of an all or nothing proposition, right? You either are focused or you're not. You either can get focused or you can't. Um, but what I would say is I would encourage you to think about focus as existing along a continuum, right? So if you look at this bar in front of you, you have least focused on one end and most focused on the other. And it's true that over the course of a class, for example, you're not going to be 100% on the most focused end for the entire 90 minutes, right? It's hard to do even when you're in a person in a studio. But now when you're home, I think that's even maybe even a bit more elusive to be all focus all the time. And not only that, it's not really natural, right? And that's not what I'm asking you to do. But it's interesting how dancers, that's what they ask of themselves, right? So many dancers say to me, well, I was really, really focused. And then all of a sudden I made this mistake and then like no more focus for the rest of the class. As if you could jump from the beginning of that continuum all the way to the end, just like in a moment, at a moment's notice, right? Because of one distraction. What I'd like you to think about is that it's more likely that you sort of fluctuate forward and back along the continuum over a long period of time. If we're talking about a 1 minute variation, when you build up your focusing skills, you should be able to stay really in the zone, really concentrated for about 80 or 90% of that 1 minute variation, right? But over the course of a 90-minute class, you're not going to be focused 80 or 90% of the time, right? You're going to move along that continuum depending on, what part of the class it is and what you're doing. So that's okay. And I just want to draw your attention to that so that you're not feeling like, oh, I've got the focus gene or I don't have it, or, you can work on it. And it's never going to be 100% all the time. When you're highly motivated and you have strong focus skills, this is when you can experience what's called being in a state of flow or being in the zone or that kind of complete presence of mind and body in the here and now. And this is what we're aiming for, right? When it really counts, not all the time, but when it really counts, when you're um, when you're doing a variation on stage, when you're performing at any time, right? When you're asked to demonstrate a combination, this is when you really want to be in the zone, right? Which basically means that your mind is focused on what your body is doing and your body is in connection to your mind. And so you have a kind of complete presence in the here and now. My guess is that most of you have experienced that at least once in your training and performing so far, right, to date. Most people have experienced it. Usually it sounds something like this. You have a really good performance or you have a really good class, and if someone asks you what you were thinking about. Like, how did that combination go so well? Wow, you did so many pirouettes. What were you thinking about? Most of the time, dancers will say, I wasn't really thinking about anything, right? Because it's not it's not the thinking that helps you do it. It's the presence, right? It's just being, having your mind connected to your body, right? And being completely in your mind and body at the same time. If you have a lot of distracting thoughts, a lot of monkey mind, it's hard to achieve that connection with your body. And so it's unusual that when people achieve this kind of flow or in the zone, it's unusual that they've been thinking about a lot of things, right? They're usually just kind of in the moment. So that's kind of what we're aiming for, right? When it counts. Again, when you really need it to count, that's what we're aiming for. Okay, so there are three types of focus that I'm going to share with you now. And again, I want to kind of break it down into these specific um, types of focus, because I want to help you build a more nuanced definition of focus. Again, if focus is just all or nothing, if it's black or white, if it's you got it or you don't, then yeah, I mean, I could see how you would think that there's nothing to build on, right? But I think once you see this more nuanced definition, it'll make it more clear to you, how you can work on this as a skill. Okay, so the three concentric circles here. The first one is your first type of focus, which is awareness. And awareness is exactly what it sounds like, when you are aware of your surroundings. So maybe you're home and you are, you're getting ready to do your class. You're aware of what's going on the Zoom screen. You're aware of the noise outside your bedroom or your studio space. You're aware of how your body is feeling, right? You're aware. The next area of focus is attention. Now, when you focus your awareness, you start to pay attention, and that's how those things are connected. And as you notice, you're getting closer in to the center circle, which is sort of the central type of focus, which we'll look at in a minute. But let's first look at attention. Um, when you start to pay attention to something interesting happens. For example, if you are watching a film on your flat screen TV at home and you're not really paying attention to it, if you're just in the awareness part of the circle, you might be sort of, you see the film, but you're sort of chatting with your mom and maybe you're eating some popcorn and you're thinking, oh, this is kind of salty, or the film is kind of loud. You're just aware of a lot of things. If your mom says to you, oh, I really want you to watch this scene, all of a sudden you pay attention to that scene, and the things that were around you in your awareness are suddenly they fade out into the background, right? So that's what happens when you pay attention. Now, there are different types of attention. There are different dimensions. There's scope and direction. The scope of your attention can be very broad or it can be very narrow. And let me give you an example. When you are doing an adagio in the center, right, or even at the bar, you may be thinking about 6 different things, right? You may be thinking about your standing leg, your working leg, your port de bras, your épaulement, and your musicality, let's just say. And then your teacher says to you, in my case, Elizabeth, standing leg, your standing leg is not stable. So in that moment, I would narrow the scope of my attention to the standing leg. And it just means that it's almost like I'm shining a mental spotlight on the standing leg, and everything else is just sort of fading into the distance. The direction of your attention can be either internal or external, right? And you've all had this experience, right? When you are watching a combination, the focus of your attention is external, right? You are looking at your teacher, you're watching her or him in terms of what they're giving you to do. So then when you do the combination, your attention is focused more internally, right? Because you're having to think about how you're going to do that that combination, what you're going to focus on, what the corrections were, etc. And what's important here is to recognize that you need both scope and directional attention in order to succeed in your dancing. And you need internal and external, and you need broad and narrow, right? So you may feel like, oh, well, my narrow scope attention is really strong, but I spend way too much time thinking broadly, and that's why I feel overwhelmed, for example. Or my internal directional focus is really good, but when I have to focus externally and learn combinations or take corrections, I have a really hard time, right? So this kind of helps you categorize sort of where you stand and what some of your challenges might be. Okay, so the third and the most central of the circles is concentration. And there are three parts of concentration. This work all comes from the field of sport and performance psychology, by the way. And most of this work comes from the performance psychologist Don Green, whose work I really like. So there are three parts of concentration as he defines them. There's your presence of focus, the intensity of your focus, and the duration of your focus. And when you are in that central circle, the idea is that you want to be sort of focusing on these three things, like how intensely focused can you be on the material? How long can you maintain that focus? And then how present are you really? So here are some exercises to help you with your focus to help build that skill for you. The first one is to is it's these are all thought exercises, right? The first one is you want to be a focused thoughts wrangler. What does this mean? So a wrangler is someone who sort of wrangles things or people or animals into a spot, right? Kind of like a rancher. Who's sort of, trying to get all the cows into the same area or all the horses into the same area of the pen, right? In this case, you can imagine that your circle of concentration is a circle, and that visualize it as an actual circle, and inside of that circle you have all of your focused thoughts, right? These are the things you want to be focused on. And what happens naturally because of the monkey mind, right, is that those thoughts start wandering out of your circle of concentration. This is totally normal. It's also extremely annoying when you're trying to be focused. So the exercise here is to maybe pick an exercise at the bar, one combination. You're always going to do this during tendu, or you're always going to do it during plie, right? Some combination where you feel like you have the mental energy to do this. And what you're going to do is you're going to gently bring your focused thoughts back into that circle of concentration. Um, and when I say gently, I mean try not to get frustrated or upset when it's hard to do, and it will be hard to do. It's very hard for anybody to control our wandering mind, right? So when your focused thoughts sort of start to go out of your circle of concentration, you can just sort of gently, come back. I'm really focused on my standing leg here. We're just going to try and stay in the circle, right? So that's an exercise that you can try. The next one is to become an observer of your distracted thoughts. So in the first exercise there, we're imagining inside that circle, you've placed your focus thoughts, and then when they go out, you're trying to get them in. In this case, you are having thoughts that aren't focused, but they're distracting, right? This is a technique that is used often in meditation. And what you're doing is you're allowing thoughts to come across your mental landscape, but you're not going to engage with them. You're going to stay focused on your task, on your corrections, on whatever it is that you've decided that you're going to focus on, but you're going to watch those wandering thoughts sort of almost like they're outside of your body. You become an observer of them. And again, you don't judge them and you don't judge yourself, because it's completely normal to have unrelated thoughts when you're engaged in a task, right? And the trouble with becoming judgmental or mad or frustrated with yourself is that then when you've heightened your emotions, it's very hard to come back into a state of focus and a state of flow. So you almost want to be unemotional and neutral, like a neutral observer, because it makes it easier to get back on track. Some of my dancers find it helpful to create a cue word or a phrase that helps them get back on track. This could be really simple, like focus, or time to concentrate, right? Whatever works for you. The task specific words are the ones that my dancers have had the most success with. So not just saying focus, but saying focus on your standing leg, right? Come back to the pirouette. Now I'm doing tendus and I need to focus on my foot articulation, right? So that the cue word to get them focused is specific to the task that they're trying to focus on. Another way of thinking about this is that one of my dancers just says her corrections to herself as she's going through the movements. And that keeps out all the distracting thoughts, right? Because she's sort of saying the corrections to herself as she's doing the movement. You can also create a journal or a log where you keep track of your focus. This is a great activity to do. It's really helpful. You can, again, you can pick a combination at the bar, or you can pick an exercise, or if you happen to be working on a variation or something like that. And what you want to do is you want to try to use some of these tools and then rate your concentration on a scale of 1 to 10. Where 10 is very focused, very, very concentrated, and 1 is not. And you're going to be looking at how intensely were you able to stay focused, what kind of presence did you have, and how long were you able to stay focused during that little exercise. And if you've come up with a really effective cue or an effective phrase, it's good to write that down so that you can remember it for the next time. The goals when you are working on focus is you want to always remember that your focus can fluctuate, right? Within the context of a long period of time, you're going to have high focus at certain times and lower focus at other times. You're going to have internal attention at some times and external attention at other times. You just want to have a very fluid relationship with this so that you don't end up getting frustrated and flustered when it's not exactly the way you thought it was going to be. Over time, you want to build your intensity and your presence and your duration of focus. It can be helpful to start this whole exercise with an assessment of what you find distracting, because sometimes just labeling it and knowing it is enough to sort of take it down a notch in terms of how much it bothers you. And you can also strategize a bit about what are the best ways to to overcome those distractions. And then you're just going to practice, right? You're going to practice managing your mind. And that is a good goal when you're thinking about your focus, is the more you practice managing the distracting thoughts, or, the monkey mind, the better it will get. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we're really aiming to be in that center circle of concentration for about 80 to 90% of any given exercise or a variation or a pas de deux or something like that. Remember, 100% is nice, but it's more like a dream and less an achievable goal. And again, just to leave you on a final note with this feedback loop, this is what we're really aiming for, because it creates in you a stronger sense of intrinsic motivation. It will enhance your focus if you're able to get those goals set and follow them through. Okay, so that's what I have for you today. I hope that it opened up some new ideas for you and maybe gave you a bit more specifics for you to think about. And I hope that it sort of gave you some sense of how you can use this summer as an opportunity to build on some of these, what I would call core strengths. These are really some of the core strengths of mental fitness that will be useful to you when you get back in the studio, will be very useful to you when you're doing auditions for a job in the future. And I think you'll find that being able to manage your powers of focus and your motivation is going to serve you across the board in your life. So, on that note, I just want to invite anyone who is interested in pursuing this topic further with me to sign up for a discovery session on my website. My URL is right here, easullivan.com. And there's a tab up there to schedule a discovery session. It's a phone call. It's socially distanced, very safe. It's 45 minutes and it's free of charge. And it's an opportunity for you to share with me your own journey in this area. And if you have any specific questions that you'd like some coaching around. And the second thing I'm giving you an opportunity to sign up here for is my newsletter. I send a newsletter out over email every 2 weeks, more or less, with other mental fitness tips, eating habits and meal plans, all kinds of wellness tips related to sort of finding your best self as a pre-professional dancer. So I invite you to explore those opportunities. And I just want to take one final minute to thank you so much for spending this time with me and investigating some of these topics and these tools with me. I hope that you find them useful. And I wish you a really productive and positive summer session. Um, and just know that everybody is more or less in the same boat that you are this summer. Let's try to make it a really positive experience, even though it may not be exactly what you had in mind for yourself this summer. It doesn't mean it's going to be a lost summer. Certainly not if you use this time to build up new areas of your expertise, including your motivation and your focus tools. So thanks very much. Have a wonderful summer and please be in touch with any questions. Bye now.